Linux Lite 4.8 was released on January 14th, 2020, and as a first in the series, it does not support UEFI. Now that's not at all a big deal, but all of the distros we've reviewed in the series up to this point have been installed using UEFI, so that is different. We'll be dropping straight into the installer here because while Linux Lite does have a live session, I prefer dedicated installers. So right out of the gate, this is Ubuntu's Ubiquity installer with what appears to be an Adapta theme styling, but the mouse cursor is, well, backwards. Besides the mouse being backwards, the Linux Lite installer is literally no different than what you would see on Ubuntu 18.4, which is what Linux Lite is based on. After the install, I was relieved to see that the mouse cursor had come to its senses and we've got this nice little welcome app. Now this welcome app is a bit odd because while each column has 4 options, each of the 4 options simply selected the first option. Like even if you chose step 2 before doing step 1, it would take you to step 1. I don't think this is a bug per se, I think that you're expected to go through each step sequentially. The welcome app has all of the regular suspects though: updates, drivers, support, and info on how to contribute to the project. And now for the system resource usage. Hold on to your butts and prepared to be blown away. Linux Lite has the coolest little bash RC config that shows you a whole bunch of really awesome stuff when you bust open a terminal. The install size was about 7.3 gigabytes, which is pretty decent, but the memory usage, 400 megabytes. That is the lowest memory usage of all of the distros we've seen on the series up to this point. Now the HTOP color scheme and layout is a bit weird, though it was showing about the same memory usage with 80 tasks and 100 threads, so the CPU usage is about on par with the other distros. Linux Lite is a distro aimed towards brand new users to Linux and comes pre-installed with every app that a new transplant would need. It uses Xfce, and the menu is styled to look like a Windows Start menu, though it's probably more like Windows XP or 7 rather than Windows 10. There are a plethora of custom Linux Lite apps. Most of them, possibly all of them, are written in raw bash, and they take noticeably longer to launch than native Xfce apps. The functionality on some of these apps were, well, there's one called Light Sounds and another one called Desktop Icons. They feel a bit redundant, to be honest, but I suppose a brand new user maybe wouldn't know where to find these in the settings manager, so these standalone apps are useful. The default background is extremely Windows 7-esque, but Linux Lite ships with a bunch of really great backgrounds. I love the stylized feather and material backgrounds. They look so good with the Adapta theme. Now there's a dedicated update manager for Linux Lite, but at the bottom right, I don't see an update applet, so besides the little toast notification that pops up when you need updates, I don't really know how users are going to know that they need to update their system. Maybe I'm missing something here? And check this out, when the update was running, I was closing all of the apps that I had opened in the previous segment and I accidentally closed the update manager by pressing escape. There wasn't any warning or anything, I just pressed escape on the wrong window and poof, it was gone. An app locked up, so I couldn't finish the update or anything. I actually had to reboot the system to get it back. Now my NVIDIA drivers were not installed out of the box, so I had to launch Ubuntu's driver manager to install them. The latest driver on offer was version 4.35, which is fine. This is pretty standard across all Ubuntu-based distros. Now systemd-analyze reports the startup time is just over 17 seconds, but I noticed that it is not reporting the firmware or loader time, so I'm not sure how accurate this number is. Now I was hoping to see the Linux Lite Feather and NeoFetch, but instead all we get is Tux. Linux Lite 4.8 is running kernel version 4.15 with 2,113 packages installed and Bash version 4.4. The desktop environment is Xfce with XFWM4 as the window manager, same as EndeavourOS, the previous episode in the series. The theme is Adapta, the icons are the Adapta flavor of Papyrus, and the terminal font is the old Droid Sans Mono, one of my least favorite monospace fonts. In the way of codec support, Linux Lite happily played all of the audio files and did quite well on that troublesome FFV1 MKV file. It was just a tad stuttery, but it was much less stuttery than the other distros we've seen in the series. Now once again I'll compare Linux Lite to EndeavourOS in that Linux Lite does not support Flatpaks or snaps, though it does support app images, of course. The lack of support for snaps and Flatpaks is a real drag though, since being based on Ubuntu, Linux Lite does not enjoy the selection and availability that comes from the AUR, other app stores and repositories. Linux Lite does have its own app for installing software, a rather unusual app, I might add. It's not an app store, but rather a manager of sorts that provides a list of seemingly curated apps. This app manager is written in pure bash and appears to recurse a list of available apps each time it's launched, which makes for a rather sluggish and very 2000s era user experience. The selection of apps here is decent, though again, it feels very like 2000, 2010 era with apps like Skype, OpenShot, Play on Linux. There's no Lutris, no Discord, no Slack, and others are missing too. Like other Distro Delves episodes, the list of apps that I test are available in the description. You can see which ones are available and which ones weren't. So the networking section of the episode is always interesting. The external SSD mounted without any issues, which is always great, but Samba was a mixed bag. In other distros, Samba either works or it doesn't work, but in Linux Lite, it was both somehow. Instead of going the route of Ubuntu, which it's based on, or Linux Mint and having a cool little Samba configurator built into the context menu, Linux Lite has an app that opens the Samba config and restarts the service. And that actually worked. I was able to find the share on my Linux workstation, but I couldn't mount it or otherwise access it. It was acting like there was some sort of authentication error, but I know my credentials were good. It's possible that I missed something in the Samba app, but if I missed something on a distro that's aimed for new users, that's not exactly a good sign. Connecting to my Windows laptop worked only if I used the IP address to connect. It wasn't discovered in the networking section, which is unfortunate but not surprising. Connecting to my Linux workstation worked just fine, which is expected. Printer support was perfect. The printer was detected, installed, and configured right out of the box. No surprises here. Bluetooth, on the other hand, did have some fun surprises. First, there's two different Bluetooth apps, one for managing the adapters and one for managing devices. I was able to connect my PS4 controller after some fiddling, but it completely screwed up mouse input, like bad. I think the controller was recognized as a straight up mouse because the analog sticks and the freaking triggers could move the mouse cursor, but the damn touchpad on the thing didn't work. And my mouse, my actual mouse, was stuck moving to the top of the screen. It was completely screwed up and I had to restart the computer to get it back. So for OBS and streaming, I'm changing the script to just do recording with OBS instead of trying to stream to Mixer, because half the time streaming doesn't work and I don't want to give the impression that the distro's at fault because it's not. In this case, I'm just recording to a file using NVENC, and that worked just fine. It's a simple test, but it's important nonetheless. Next up, I wanted to show this weird thing that Steam did when I first launched it. A sub-window appeared asking me to install a library for Mesa. If you know anything about Linux display drivers, Mesa is used for the open source display drivers, so it's a little strange that I'm being asked to install it here when I'm using NVIDIA's binary driver. Now I'm playing Mad Max here, and do you see it? That little box in the middle of the screen? I have no idea where that's coming from, but it eventually went away on its own. You may also notice that the tooltips that show up from time to time switch between gamepad controls and keyboard controls. I'm using that PS4 controller here, and Mad Max is about as confused as I am as to what the hell the system's doing. But other than these weird issues, the game ran great. The performance was more than passable, and I'm using the opt-in Vulkan build of Mad Max. Sometimes the camera would get stuck, but that's not a performance issue. I'm pretty sure that's that input thing. Now, I've been waiting to show some Star Wars Galaxies on the channel for quite some time, and this Distro Delves episode has given me excuse to do it. I'm not playing with the controller here, obviously, but I was still having some input issues. I couldn't attack these creatures outside the city here. I can't say if the distro is at fault for this, but given the previous input issues, I don't know. This is kind of a major issue though. I mean, I can't do much I can't shoot, I can't really do anything. The performance was seemingly okay though. In cities it was pretty laggy, but in space and places where there aren't a ton of details and things going on, it ran pretty good. This is Star Wars Galaxies, by the way. If you want, I can do a video on this in the future about getting this set up on Linux. It's a pretty old and weird game, but it's nostalgic nonetheless. And last, I'm so very excited to show off this delightfully bizarre game called Lugaro. I think that's how you say it. This was one of the first Linux games I played, and I hated it at the time because the controls are so weird. I mean, everything about the game is weird. It's an older game from the late 2000s, I think, but the graphics are on full blast and it runs great. It's available from the default repos on pretty much every Linux distribution, so I recommend that you check it out and see for yourself how freaking weird this game is. A quick shout out to Wolffire Games for making Lugaro and other games like it, all of them available on Linux. They released the source code for Lugaro after they released the successor to it. That's pretty cool. Now, are you ready to talk raw performance benchmarks? Because I am. Remember that 400 megabytes of memory usage at idle? How do you think that'll translate into the Geekbench scores, huh? Well, we have a new winner. Linux Lite beat the current champion Linux Mint in the CPU arena. To be fair, it beat Linux Mint by like a tiny amount, but it's great to see that there's a new solid contender here. Funnily enough though, Linux Mint still won the Vulkan tests, which is interesting because they use the exact same NVIDIA driver version. But Linux Lite is a peculiar little distro. It's aimed towards new users, though it's like insanely light on resources, and if I didn't know anything about it beforehand, I would have assumed that it was an ultra lightweight distro aimed at older or low spec hardware. To be totally honest with you, other than the Linux Lite apps, there isn't a whole lot about the distro that made it feel particularly good for new users. I mean, yeah, there's like custom styling in the start menu, but like a lot of distros have that. For instance, Farron OS has that. All in all, even after making this video, I don't really have an opinion about Linux Lite. It's been around for quite some time, but I've never really heard of it mentioned the way that I hear like Pop OS, Elementary OS, or even MX Linux. Either way, it's a curious little distro, and if you're interested in it, you should give it a poke and check it out. And with that, we have reached the end of this episode of Distro Delves. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and if you did, be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe. The best way that you can support the channel and the series is to share this video and other Distro Delves videos places where people might be interested. These episodes are actually really fun to make, and I'm really happy that you guys enjoy them so much. If you want to follow me and learn more about what I do and things like that, I've got Twitter, I've got Coffee, and I've got Patreon. I appreciate all your support, and thanks for watching.